Hello and welcome to another time-lapse sketching tutorial. As usual, this is the condensed version of the full-length tutorial I have made for my patrons. If you want to watch the full tutorial at normal speed, consider supporting me on Patreon. The link is in the video description below. Let's take a look at the reference photo, which you can download using the download link provided. So these are some shop houses in Singapore, and the challenging part here is to measure the angles of those diagonal lines, especially the lines created by the roofs right at the top of the photo. If I'm sketching out on location, I will be using my pen or pencil to measure the angles, because some of those lines may look like they are going up, but after you measure them, they are actually going down. So those lines can be really tricky. It's more accurate to measure those angles with your pen or pencil. The sketchbook that I'm using is the St. Louis Art Supply watercolor sketchbook with cold press watercolor paper. The company also sells sketchbooks with hot press smooth paper. So when it comes to drawing challenging scenes like this with challenging perspective, I would usually use a pencil to mark out the big shapes first to get the angles right. And this stage is very important, because if you get the angles wrong at this stage, all the other elements that you draw later on will be affected by those initial lines. So all the angles of the windows, the cars, everything else will be affected. So if you get those lines wrong at the start, it's going to be very tricky to correct all those things that you are going to draw later on. So I have already marked out the big shapes, and now I'm just inking the big shapes first. I usually just draw the longest lines that I can see and work my way down to the details. So the pen that I'm using is the Pelikan M200 fountain pen that I've been using for years. When it comes to drawing, the more confident you feel, the better your sketch will look. Your confidence is actually shown through the lines. And when it comes to drawing, always try to close up the gaps. Otherwise, it looks like the line is floating. When you close up the gaps, when you connect the lines, you create structure, you create form. The key to making an accurate sketch is actually just observation. There you see an ink blob that came out of the pen. The pen is the Derwent line painter. It would occasionally spit out ink blobs, which can add to the character of the sketch. But those are pens that you won't want to use if you want consistency, like you don't want strange things happening. Yeah, I like to use these pens because they come in many different colors and they are waterproof and dry. So now you see me draw the windows within the big shapes on the wall. So after you have drawn the big shapes, it's very easy to draw the details within. I'm still measuring the angles occasionally just to make sure that I get those angles right. And when sketching, it's good to sometimes just push your sketchbook away to look at it from afar to get a sense of how your sketch is doing, how your sketch is looking. Now, drawing vehicles and drawing people in the scene is actually quite useful, because they help to create life, a sense of liveliness. And when you have vehicles in the scene, they will overlap the buildings in the background. You can also create this sense of foreground and background. You can create this sense of depth. So for the buildings, the offices, the skyscrapers in the background, I actually drew them with colored pencils. So this is a mixed media sketch. I used black ink, I used brown, magenta-like ink. I also used colored pencils, and you can see some of the plants, they were drawn with green ink. So mixed media is fun, but you have to try mixing different mediums to see which one works, because not all media will work well together. So the colors I'm using for this sketch is actually a limited color palette. It's French Ultramarine. The yellow is probably New Gamboge. The darker brown color is Quinacridone Gold. And for the red, I usually use warm red. I also have some burnt sienna probably. To draw details or to paint details such as the windows, you have to use a brush with a sharp tip. And we have the vehicles in front. So this sketch is slowly coming to life after you add the colors, after you add the shadows. I'm actually drawing and painting this at home, which is very comfortable. If I'm drawing this on location, it's going to be quite challenging because I would always have to look up, so I can imagine myself straining my neck. It is not easy to draw tall subjects. It's not easy to draw tall buildings because you always have to look up and look down at your sketchbook again and look up and down. So the last stage is just me painting some shadows over the initial watercolor wash and using the Posca marker and the white gel pen to add more details. I am actually quite pleased with this sketch. I feel like it looks quite lively. You can also add more people in the scene to make it look more lively. So this is how the sketch looks. The left side looks a bit blank, so I just want to draw a window there. I can let the lines fit into the white of the paper. For a spiral bound sketchbook, I try not to draw too close to the wire on the left side because when it comes to scanning, the paper has to be in contact with the scanner, the glass of the scanner. Otherwise, the area near the wire will appear blur. So here's a close-up on the sketch. I probably took 1.5 hours to draw this. The actual tutorial I have made for my patrons is over 30 minutes. So if you want to watch that, come over to Patreon to find me. And that's a great way to support my YouTube channel to help me make more videos and tutorials and reviews.